a quiet power within every human being that often goes unnoticed, not because it is hidden, but because it feels too simple to be taken seriously. We are taught to look outward for solutions, to chase circumstances, to struggle against reality, and to measure our potential by what we see around us. Yet there exists a different approach, one that does not rely on force, competition, or even visible action at first. It is the art of imagining correctly and allowing an unseen law to shape the world in response. To imagine correctly is not the same as daydreaming. It is not idle fantasy, nor is it wishful thinking detached from reality. It is a deliberate, focused act of inner creation. It begins with understanding that imagination is not merely a mental playground, but a creative faculty. What you consistently hold in your inner world begins to express itself in your outer world. This may sound abstract at first, but if you observe your life carefully, you may notice that your assumptions, expectations, and beliefs quietly precede your experiences. Think about how often you anticipate outcomes before they happen. You walk into a room expecting rejection, and your behavior subtly aligns with that expectation. You approach a task believing it will be difficult, and it becomes exactly that. On the other hand, when you feel confident and certain, things often unfold more smoothly. These are small examples of a much larger principle at work. The key lies not in imagining randomly, but in imagining correctly. Correct imagination means choosing a desired outcome and experiencing it inwardly as if it is already real, has already been fulfilled. It means stepping beyond the limitations of the present moment and inhabiting a state where your wish has already been fulfilled. This is not about denying reality, but about redefining it from within. Many people struggle with this because they try to force results while still internally doubting them. They may visualize success, but underneath that visualization is fear, uncertainty, or a sense of lack. The outer effort conflicts with the inner state, and the result is inconsistency. To imagine correctly, your inner experience must feel natural, believable, and complete. Consider how memory works. When you recall a past event, you do not question its reality. Accept it as something that has already happened. Correct imagination operates in a similar way. Instead of thinking of your desire as something distant, you bring it into the present moment in your mind and feel it as already accomplished. You are not waiting for it, you are remembering it. This shift changes everything. When you no longer feel like you are chasing something, you stop generating resistance. You are no longer acting from a place of lack, but from a place of fulfillment. And from that state, your actions, decisions, and even your reactions begin to align with the outcome you have already accepted internally. There is also an important element of persistence. The world does not always rearrange itself instantly, and this can cause doubt to creep in. But if you understand that the inner state is the cause and the outer world is the effect, then patience becomes easier. You are no longer looking for immediate proof, you are maintaining a state that you know will eventually express itself. Imagine planting a seed. You do not dig it up every day to check if it is growing. You trust the process, water it, and allow time to do its work. The same way, once you have imagined correctly, your role is not to constantly question it, but to remain faithful to it. Doubt is like digging up the seed. Confidence is like letting it grow undisturbed. Another important aspect is clarity. Vague desires produce vague results. If you are uncertain about what you want, your imagination cannot form a clear picture. But when you are specific, when you know exactly what you desire and why, your inner experience becomes more vivid and more powerful. You are not imagining something better, you are experiencing a defined reality. Emotion also plays a significant role. It is not enough to see the outcome, you must feel it. What would it feel like if your desire were already fulfilled? Would you feel relief, joy, pride, peace? These feelings are not side effects, they are part of the creative process. They signal that you are truly inhabiting the state you wish to experience. However, it is important to understand that this is not about forcing emotions either. It is about allowing them to arise naturally as you immerse yourself in the imagined reality. If it feels artificial, simplify the scene. Focus on something small and believable. Instead of imagining an entire life transformation, imagine a single moment that implies it has already happened, a conversation, a gesture, a quiet sense of satisfaction. There is also a tendency to look for signs. People often want reassurance that what they are doing is working. They scan their environment for hints, coincidences, or confirmations. While signs can appear, relying on them can become a distraction. The real work is internal. The more you depend on external validation, the more you shift your focus away from the source of creation. To let the law work for you means to trust that once the inner state is established, the outer world will reorganize itself accordingly. This does not mean you become passive or inactive. It means your actions become guided rather than forced. You will still take steps, make decisions, and engage with life. But these actions will feel more natural, more aligned, and less driven by anxiety. Think of it like tuning a radio. When you adjust the frequency, the music changes automatically. You do not need to manipulate the sound waves directly, you simply tune to the desired station. The inner state is the frequency, and your outer experience is the music. By changing one, you influence the other. It is also worth addressing the role of self-concept. The way you see yourself determines what you believe is possible. If you imagine success but still identify as someone who is unworthy or incapable, there will be conflict. To imagine correctly, you must also begin to see yourself as the person who already has what you desire. This is not arrogance, it is alignment. Ask yourself, who would I be if this were already true? How would I think, speak, and act? Then begin to embody that version of yourself, even in small ways. This does not require dramatic changes. It can be as simple as carrying yourself differently, making decisions with more confidence, or refusing to engage in negative self-talk. There will be moments when reality seems to contradict your imagination. This is where discipline becomes essential. Do you react to appearances, or do you remain anchored in your chosen state? This does not mean ignoring problems, but it means not allowing them to define your identity or your expectations. Over time, as you practice this, you may notice a shift. Things that once felt difficult begin to flow more easily. Opportunities appear in unexpected ways. People respond differently to you. These changes may seem coincidental, but they are reflections of the inner transformation that has taken place. It is important to approach this with sincerity rather than desperation. When you are desperate, you reinforce the idea that you do not have what you want. When you are sincere, you focus on the experience itself, not just the result. You enjoy the act of imagining, not because you are trying to escape reality, but because you are shaping it. Another misconception is that this process is about controlling every detail of life. It is not. It is about selecting the end you desire and allowing the path to unfold naturally. Trying to control every step can create tension and limit possibilities. Often the way things happen is more efficient and more creative than anything you could plan consciously. Trust plays a central role here. Not blind belief, but a growing confidence based on experience. As you apply this principle and see results, even small ones, your trust deepens. Rely less on external conditions and more on your inner state. This shift brings a sense of stability that is not easily shaken by circumstances. It is also helpful to understand that this is not about perfection. You will have moments of doubt, distraction, and inconsistency. That is part of being human. The goal is not to eliminate these moments, but to return to your chosen state more quickly each time. Progress is measured not by flawless execution, but by persistence. As you continue, you may find that your desires themselves begin to change. What once seemed important may lose its appeal, and new aspirations may emerge. This is a natural evolution. The more you connect with your inner creative power, the more you become aware of what truly matters to you. Ultimately, imagining correctly and allowing the law to work for you is about reclaiming responsibility for your inner world. It is about recognizing that you are not merely reacting to life, but participating in its creation. This does not mean you control everything, but it does mean you have influence far more than you may have realized. When you understand this, you stop seeing yourself as a victim of circumstances and begin to see yourself as a contributor to them. This shift is empowering, but it also requires honesty. You must be willing to examine your thoughts, your beliefs, and your assumptions, even when they are uncomfortable. The reward for this effort is not just external success, although that may come. It is a deeper sense of alignment, clarity, and peace. You are no longer chasing outcomes blindly, you are creating them consciously. You are no longer waiting for life to change, you are changing the way you experience life. In the end, the practice is simple, but not always easy. Choose what you want. Imagine it is already real. Feel it as natural. Remain faithful to it, and allow the process to unfold. There is no need to force, no need to struggle unnecessarily. The power you seek is already within you. waiting to be used with intention and understanding. And once you begin to apply it consistently, you may discover something remarkable, that the world you once thought was fixed and unchangeable is far more responsive than you ever imagined. As this understanding deepens, you begin to notice how subtle your inner conversations really are. Throughout the day, there is a constant stream of thoughts running quietly in the background, commenting, judging, predicting, remembering. Most of these go unnoticed, yet they form the foundation of your assumptions about life. If these inner dialogues remain unchecked, they continue to recreate the same patterns over and over again. To imagine correctly, you must become aware of these inner conversations and gently redirect them. This is not about suppressing thoughts or forcing positivity in a superficial way. It is about choosing a direction. When you catch yourself expecting the worst, pause and ask, "What would I rather be true?" Then allow your mind to move in that direction, even if only slightly at first. This practice may feel unnatural in the beginning, especially if you are used to reacting automatically. But like any skill, it becomes easier with repetition. The more you practice, the more natural it feels to choose your inner state instead of being controlled by it. Over time, this shift becomes less of an effort and more of a habit. Another important element is the use of mental imagery before sleep. The moments just before drifting off are particularly powerful because the mind is more receptive and less analytical. Instead of replaying worries or unresolved problems, you can use this time to construct a simple scene that implies your desire has already been fulfilled. Keep it short, vivid, and emotionally satisfying. For example, imagine a brief conversation where someone congratulates you, or a quiet moment where you feel a sense of relief and accomplishment. Loop this scene gently, without strain, until it begins to feel natural. The goal is not intensity, but consistency. Night after night, this repeated experience impresses the mind in a way that gradually influences your waking reality. During the day, it is not necessary to constantly visualize. In fact, overdoing it can create tension. Instead, carry a quiet, knowing, a subtle sense that what you have imagined is already in motion. This calm confidence is far more effective than anxious repetition. You are not trying to make something happen, you are allowing it to unfold. Reactions to external events also reveal where your attention is anchored. If something unexpected happens, do you immediately assume the worst? Or do you remain grounded in your chosen state? This does not mean ignoring challenges, but it means interpreting them differently. What appears as a setback may simply be part of a larger rearrangement. There is also a tendency to compare your progress with others. You may look at someone else's success and feel behind or discouraged. But this comparison is based on appearances, not on the unseen processes that lead to those outcomes. Each person's path is shaped by their own inner patterns, their own assumptions, and their own persistence. When you focus on your own practice, comparison loses its hold. Gratitude can also support this process, but not in the way it is often misunderstood. It is not about forcing yourself to be grateful for things you do not truly appreciate. Instead, it is about recognizing the connection between your inner state and your outer experience. When you feel gratitude for something, you are acknowledging its presence as real. This same feeling can be extended to your imagined reality, reinforcing its sense of completion. It is also helpful to simplify your approach. Many people complicate this process by trying to follow too many techniques at once. They visualize, affirm, analyze, and constantly check for results, often creating confusion. Simplicity brings clarity. Choose one clear idea, one desired outcome, and return to it consistently. Depth is more effective than variety. Language plays a role as well. The words you use, both internally and externally, reflect your assumptions. Phrases like "I hope," "I'll try," or "maybe someday" carry uncertainty. While there is nothing inherently wrong with these expressions, becoming aware of them allows you to shift toward more definite language. Even subtle changes can influence how you perceive your situation. Another aspect to consider is the environment you surround yourself with. While your inner state is primary, external influences can either support or challenge your focus. Conversations filled with negativity, constant exposure to discouraging information, or environments that reinforce limitation can make it more difficult to maintain your chosen state. This does not mean isolating yourself, but it does mean being selective about what you absorb regularly. As you continue, you may encounter moments where nothing seems to be changing. These periods can test your persistence. It may feel as though your efforts are not producing results, leading to frustration or doubt. During these times, it is important to remember that change often occurs beneath the surface before it becomes visible. Just as a seed grows roots before it breaks through the soil, your inner work may be establishing a foundation that is not yet apparent. If doubt arises, do not fight it aggressively. Instead, acknowledge it and return gently to your chosen state. Resistance often strengthens what you are trying to avoid, while calm redirection gradually shifts your focus. You are not aiming for perfection, but for consistency over time. There is also value in reflecting on past experiences. Think of moments when something worked out unexpectedly, or when an opportunity appeared at just the right time. While it may have seemed coincidental, these moments can offer insight into how life responds to subtle shifts in perception and expectation. Recognizing these patterns can strengthen your confidence in the process. It is equally important to avoid turning this into a rigid system of rules. The essence of imagining correctly is creative, flexible, and personal. What works for one person may not feel natural for another. The goal is not to follow a formula blindly, but to discover what allows you to enter a state of natural acceptance and ease. As your understanding grows, you may find that your relationship with uncertainty begins to change. Instead of fearing the unknown, you become more comfortable with it. You realize that not every detail needs to be planned or predicted. There is a balance between intention and openness, a willingness to define what you want, while allowing life to determine how it unfolds. This balance reduces pressure. You are no longer trying to control every outcome, nor are you passively waiting. You are participating in a process that involves both inner clarity and outer responsiveness. This interaction creates a sense of flow, where actions feel timely and appropriate rather than forced. Over time, your awareness expands beyond individual desires. You begin to see how your assumptions influence not just specific outcomes, but your overall experience of life. The same principles apply whether you are focusing on a small goal or a larger vision. The scale may differ, but the process remains consistent. You may also notice that your reactions to success change. Instead of feeling surprised or overwhelmed, you begin to expect positive outcomes more naturally. This does not lead to complacency, but to a quiet confidence. Success becomes less of an exception and more of a reflection of your inner alignment. At the same time, challenges do not disappear entirely. Life continues to present situations that require attention and response. The difference is in how you approach them. Instead of reacting from fear or limitation, you respond from a place of stability. This shift often leads to more effective solutions and a greater sense of control. There is also a deeper level of responsibility that comes with this understanding. Recognizing your role in shaping your experience means acknowledging that your inner state matters. This awareness can be empowering, but it can also feel demanding at times. However, it is not about blame, it is about choice. You are not responsible for every external event, but you are responsible for how you interpret and respond to them internally. As this practice becomes integrated into your daily life, it begins to feel less like a technique and more like a natural way of thinking. You no longer need to remind yourself constantly. The process becomes intuitive. Your imagination shifts from being reactive to being intentional, and your expectations align more closely with your desires. This transformation does not happen overnight, but it does not require years of struggle either. It develops gradually through awareness, practice, and persistence. Each small shift contributes to a larger change, and over time, these changes accumulate into a different experience of life. You may find that your sense of identity evolves as well. Instead of defining yourself by past experiences or current circumstances, you begin to see yourself as adaptable and creative. This flexibility allows you to move beyond limitations that once seemed fixed. You are no longer confined by what has been, you are guided by what you choose to become. This way, imagining correctly becomes more than a method for achieving specific goals. It becomes a way of engaging with life itself, an approach that emphasizes possibility, intention, and inner alignment. And as you continue to apply it, you may discover that the boundary between imagination and reality becomes less rigid, revealing a connection that was always present but rarely understood. As this connection becomes clearer, you start to notice how even your smallest assumptions carry weight. A passing thought about how a conversation might go, a quiet expectation about how someone will respond. or a subtle belief about your own abilities, all of these begin to reveal their influence. What once felt insignificant now appears as part of a continuous chain linking inner perception to outer experience. This awareness can feel almost unsettling at first, because it removes the illusion that things simply happen without any relation to you. Instead, you begin to see patterns. Not rigid, predictable formulas, but tendencies, recurring themes shaped by the state you occupy most often. And once you see these patterns, you also see that they can be changed. Changing them does not require force. In fact, force often reinforces the very patterns you want to move beyond. What is needed instead is a shift in identity at a subtle level. Rather than trying to fix isolated problems, you begin to adopt a different sense of self, the version of you for whom those problems are no longer natural. This shift may be gradual, but it carries a depth that surface-level changes cannot achieve. You might begin by asking yourself what feels normal. Not what you want, but what you truly expect. Do you expect things to work out, or do you brace for disappointment? Do you feel at ease with success, or does it seem distant and unfamiliar? These questions reveal the baseline from which your experiences emerge. To imagine correctly is to gently raise that baseline. This does not mean ignoring your current situation or pretending it does not exist. It means giving more authority to your inner vision than to your present conditions. The outer world reflects past states, while your imagination introduces new ones. When you understand this, you stop using current circumstances as the final verdict and begin to see them as temporary expressions. There's also a refinement that takes place in how you imagine. In the beginning, it may feel like an effort, something you have to remember to do, but over time, it becomes more fluid. Instead of setting aside specific moments to imagine, you begin to carry the feeling with you. It shows up in how you walk, how you speak, how you respond. The imagined state starts to blend with your natural behavior. At this stage, you may notice a quiet confidence that does not need constant reinforcement. You are no longer trying to convince yourself of something, you are simply living from it. This difference is subtle but important. Convincing involves struggle, while living from a state involves acceptance. One feels like effort, the other like ease. There will still be moments when old patterns resurface. A situation may trigger a familiar reaction, pulling you back into a previous way of thinking. When this happens, the goal is not to judge yourself, but to recognize the shift and return. Each time you do this, you weaken the old pattern and strengthen the new one. It is also helpful to understand that not every imagined outcome needs to be dramatic. In life, some of the most meaningful changes occur quietly. A smoother interaction, a new perspective, a sense of calm where there was once tension, these are all expressions of alignment. When you appreciate these smaller shifts, you build momentum without pressure. Your relationship with time may also begin to change. Instead of feeling rushed or impatient, you develop a sense of timing that feels more natural. You act when it feels appropriate, and you wait when necessary without anxiety. This does not mean passivity, it means responsiveness. You are no longer driven by urgency, but guided by clarity. As your inner state stabilizes, your attention becomes more selective. You naturally gravitate toward thoughts, ideas, and experiences that support your chosen direction. This is not forced positivity, but a genuine preference. Negative or limiting thoughts lose their appeal, not because you are avoiding them, but because they no longer resonate. There is also a shift in how you interpret other people's behavior. Instead of reacting immediately, you begin to see interactions as reflections of deeper assumptions, both yours and theirs. This perspective creates space. I respond with more intention and less reactivity, which often changes the outcome of the interaction itself. In this process, patience is not something you have to practice consciously, it emerges naturally. When you feel that your inner state is already complete, waiting does not feel like a burden. You are not waiting for something to happen, you are allowing it to appear. This subtle difference transforms the experience of time. You may also find that creativity expands in unexpected ways. When your imagination is no longer confined to worry or repetition, it becomes a source of insight. Ideas flow more easily, solutions appear more naturally, and you begin to approach situations with a sense of possibility rather than limitation. At times, you might encounter resistance from your surroundings. People who are used to a certain version of you may respond differently as you change. This is not a sign that something is wrong, it is simply an adjustment. As you remain consistent in your new state, these interactions tend to shift as well. It is important to remain grounded during this process. While imagination is powerful, it is not separate from practical life. You still engage with responsibilities, make decisions, and take action. The difference is that these actions are no longer driven by fear or doubt, but by alignment with your inner state. There is also a growing sense of independence. You rely less on external approval or validation because your direction comes from within. This does not isolate you from others, but it frees you from the need to constantly seek reassurance. Your confidence becomes self-sustained. As you continue, you may begin to notice moments where things align so smoothly that they almost feel effortless. Opportunities arise at the right time, conversations unfold naturally, and outcomes seem to fall into place. These moments are not accidents, they are indications of coherence between your inner and outer worlds. Even so, it is important not to become attached to specific outcomes in a rigid way. Flexibility allows for outcomes that may be even better than what you initially imagined. When you hold your vision with clarity but without tension, you create space for unexpected possibilities. Your understanding of effort also evolves. You realize that effort is not about strain but about direction. I.e., it is the consistent return to your chosen state, the willingness to remain aligned even when distractions arise. This kind of effort feels purposeful, rather than exhausting. There is also a deepening sense of awareness about how quickly states can shift. A single thought can change your mood, your perspective, and even your behavior. Recognizing this gives you a sense of immediacy. You do not have to wait for external changes to feel different. You can shift internally at any moment. This immediacy can be both liberating and challenging. It means that responsibility is always present, but so is opportunity. No matter what is happening externally, there is always a point of choice within you. This choice may be small, but its effects can be significant over time. As this becomes more natural, you begin to trust yourself in a different way. Not just your abilities, but your inner direction. You become more comfortable following your instincts, making decisions without overanalyzing, and allowing life to unfold without constant interference. In this state, learning continues, but it feels less like effort and more like discovery. Each experience adds to your understanding, not as a rigid rule, but as a refinement of awareness. You become more attuned to what feels aligned and what does not, and you adjust accordingly. Gradually, the separation between imagining and living becomes less distinct. What you accept internally begins to express itself so naturally that it no longer feels like a process. It feels like a continuation. At continuity, you start to see that what once required practice has become part of how you perceive and engage with everything around you, and as this way of being stabilizes further, even the idea of trying to make something happen begins to fade, replaced by a quieter recognition that the direction has already been set internally, and that what unfolds externally is simply catching up with a state that has already been accepted, already been lived in, already been assumed as true within you, long before any visible confirmation appears. And from that point, the entire relationship you once had with effort, struggle, and uncertainty begins to soften in a way that is almost difficult to explain to someone who has not experienced it directly. Because what used to feel like pushing against life now feels more like moving with it, as though there is a current that was always present but unnoticed, and now instead of resisting it, you are aligned with it. This alignment does not remove challenges, but it changes their nature, because you no longer interpret them as obstacles standing in your way, but as movements within a larger unfolding that you have already set in motion internally. And this shift in interpretation prevents the emotional reactions that once disrupted your state, allowing you to remain steady even when circumstances appear temporarily inconsistent with your inner acceptance. There is also a quiet shift in how you perceive cause and effect, because instead of believing that external events determine how you feel, you begin to notice that your internal state often precedes and shapes those events. And this realization brings with it a sense of stability that does not depend on conditions, because you are no longer waiting for something outside of you to change before you allow yourself to feel a certain way. This stability creates space for a different kind of attention, one that is less scattered and more deliberate, where you are no longer pulled in multiple directions by every passing thought or external influence, but instead remain centered in a chosen awareness, returning to it again and again until it becomes familiar, until it becomes natural. until it becomes the place you operate from without needing to think about it. And as this familiarity grows, you may notice that your reactions slow down, not in a forced or unnatural way, but simply because there is a gap now between what happens and how you respond. And within that gap is your freedom, the ability to choose whether you will return to an old pattern or remain aligned with the state you have accepted as true. This gap is subtle, but it is powerful, because it is where transformation happens, not through dramatic effort, but through small, consistent choices that accumulate over time, gradually reshaping your inner landscape until it reflects something entirely different from where you began. There is also a deepening sense of trust that develops, not based on blind belief, but on repeated experience, because as you continue to see the correspondence between your inner state and your outer world, even in small ways, your confidence grows. And with that confidence comes a willingness to rely more fully on this process without constantly questioning it. At the same time, your dependence on external validation begins to diminish, because you no longer need immediate proof to maintain your state. And this independence allows you to remain steady even when there is no visible evidence yet, knowing that what you have accepted internally does not require constant confirmation to be real. This does not mean that you become detached or indifferent to life, but rather that your engagement with it becomes more intentional, because you are no longer reacting unconsciously, but responding from a place of awareness. And this changes the quality of your interactions, your decisions, and even your presence. People may begin to notice this difference, even if they cannot explain it, because there is a certain calmness, a certain clarity, a certain confidence that emerges when you are no longer divided within yourself, when your inner state and your outer actions are aligned. And this alignment often influences how others respond to you in ways that feel natural rather than forced. There is also a growing understanding that imagination is not separate from reality, but part of it, not an escape from what is, but a way of shaping what becomes. And this understanding dissolves the old habit of dismissing inner experiences as insignificant, replacing it with a recognition that what happens within you is just as important as what happens around you. As this recognition settles in, you may find that you become more selective not only with your thoughts, but with your attention as a whole, because attention is the gateway through which impressions enter and states are formed. And by choosing where you place it, you influence what you experience, both internally and externally. This does not require constant vigilance, but it does involve awareness, a gentle noticing of where your mind tends to go, and a willingness to guide it when necessary, not through force, but through preference. Choosing what aligns with your desired state over what reinforces old patterns there is also a refinement in how you relate to desire itself. Because instead of seeing it as something that highlights what you lack, you begin to see it as an invitation to expand, a signal pointing toward a state that you are ready to experience. And this shift removes the tension that often accompanies wanting, replacing it with curiosity and openness. In this way, desire no longer creates distance, but direction, and instead of chasing it, you move into it internally, allowing the experience to become present within you before it appears externally. And this internal movement is what initiates the external reflection. Over time, even the idea of waiting begins to lose its meaning, because you are no longer oriented toward a future where something will finally happen, but grounded in a present where it already has, at least in your awareness. And this changes how time feels, making it less like something you are racing against, and more like something that unfolds naturally. There is also a subtle joy that can emerge from this way of being, not dependent on specific outcomes, but arising from the act of creating, from the recognition that you are participating in something dynamic and responsive, something that is not fixed but fluid, shaped continuously by the states you occupy. This joy is quiet, not overwhelming but steady, and it adds a different quality to your daily experience, making even ordinary moments feel more intentional, more connected, more alive in a way that does not rely on constant stimulation or dramatic change. And as this continues, you may begin to notice that your sense of identity becomes less rigid, less defined by past experiences or external labels, and more fluid, more adaptable, allowing you to move between states with greater ease, choosing who you are being rather than feeling confined to who you have been. This flexibility is not instability, but freedom, because it allows you to respond to life in ways that are aligned with your current intention rather than conditioned by old patterns. And this responsiveness creates a sense of empowerment that is grounded rather than forced. At the same time, there is an increasing simplicity in how you approach this entire process, because what once felt complex begins to feel straightforward, not because there is less depth, but because you no longer overcomplicate it with unnecessary steps or constant analysis. You return again and again to the same core idea, that what you accept as true internally shapes what you experience externally. And instead of searching for new methods or techniques, you deepen your understanding of this one principle through direct application, and in doing so, you begin to rely less on external explanations and more on your own observation, your own experience, your own awareness of how your inner state influences your outer world. And this reliance creates a sense of clarity that does not depend on constant input from outside sources. There is also a quiet recognition that this process does not have a final endpoint, because it is not something you complete, but something you continue to explore, refine, and deepen over time, with each experience adding to your understanding, each shift revealing something new about how this relationship between imagination and reality operates. And as you remain engaged with it, not as a rigid practice but as a natural way of being, you may find that what once felt like an effort to imagine correctly has become something far more integrated, something that happens almost automatically, where your default state begins to align more consistently with what you choose rather than what you fear. And in that ongoing alignment, the line between intention and experience continues to blur, not in a confusing way, but in a way that makes it increasingly clear that what you live outwardly is inseparable from what you accept inwardly, and that this acceptance, once stable, continues to express itself in ways that do not always follow a predictable path, but consistently reflect the direction you have already established within yourself. And as this becomes more evident in your daily experience, you begin to notice that the need to constantly figure things out starts to lose its grip, because you are no longer approaching life as a problem to be solved, but as a state to be occupied. And this shift quietly removes a layer of mental tension that you may not have even realized was there in the first place. In that reduced tension, clarity begins to surface more naturally, not as something forced through analysis, but as something that appears when the mind is not overloaded with contradiction. And you start to see that many of the difficulties you once struggled with were not caused by external complexity alone, but by internal conflict between what you assumed, what you feared, and what you desired all at once. As that conflict begins to settle, your decisions become simpler, not because life has become simpler, but because your inner reference point has become more stable. And when that reference point is steady, you do not oscillate as much between doubt and certainty, between hope and fear, between expectation and hesitation. This stability also changes how you relate to time pressure, because urgency often arises from the belief that something must happen outside of you before you can feel a certain way. But when your inner state is no longer dependent on external timing, urgency begins to dissolve, and you find yourself acting more appropriately rather than reactively. There is also a noticeable change in how you experience repetition in life. Those familiar patterns that used to feel discouraging or limiting begin to appear more neutral, because instead of seeing them as proof that nothing is changing, you start to recognize them as opportunities to maintain a different inner response. And in doing so, you stop reinforcing the same cycle through emotional reaction. Over time, this new way of responding becomes less deliberate and more instinctive, and you may not even catch every moment of alignment, because it begins to happen naturally, as though your mind has learned a new default setting that no longer requires constant correction or effort to maintain at the same time. Your imagination itself becomes quieter but more effective, because it is no longer cluttered with contradiction or doubt. And when you do engage it, even briefly, it carries more impact because it is supported by a more consistent underlying assumption rather than being contradicted immediately afterward by opposing thoughts. This consistency is important because it is not intensity that shapes experience most effectively, but continuity, the steady return to the same state without constantly undoing it through conflicting inner dialogue. And as continuity strengthens, results begin to reflect that inner coherence more clearly. You also begin to notice that certain emotional triggers lose their influence, not because they disappear completely, but because they no longer pull you into prolonged identification, and instead of being absorbed by them, you observe them and return more quickly to your chosen perspective, shortening the distance between disturbance and realignment. In this way, emotional resilience is not something you force, but something that develops as a byproduct of repeated inner correction. And each time you return to your desired state, instead of remaining in reaction, you reinforce a new pattern of response that gradually replaces the old one. There is also a subtle shift in how expectations function, because instead of expecting based on past evidence alone, you begin to expect based on inner selection. And while the external world may still show delay or contradiction at times, your expectation remains anchored in what you have already accepted internally, rather than what is currently visible. This creates a form of inner independence that is not detached from reality, but not enslaved by it either, where you can observe circumstances without letting them dictate your state. And this ability becomes one of the most stabilizing aspects of the entire process. As this independence strengthens, you may also notice that your sense of effort becomes more refined, because you are no longer exerting effort in every direction, but only in maintaining alignment when needed. And even that begins to feel less like effort and more like returning to something familiar. There is a quiet intelligence in this return, because each time you realign, you are not starting over, but reinforcing a pathway that becomes easier to access. And over time, that pathway becomes the default route your mind naturally follows, without needing conscious direction. At a deeper level, your relationship with possibility itself begins to expand, because what once seemed unlikely or distant no longer feels out of reach in the same way, not because you have forced belief, but because your inner experience has become less limited by immediate appearances, allowing more space for what is not yet visible to be considered normal within your awareness. This expansion does not make you unrealistic. Rather, it makes your perception less confined to present evidence alone. And this broader perception allows you to hold intentions with greater ease, without collapsing into doubt every time there is a delay or inconsistency in the external world at the same time. Your attention becomes more disciplined without being rigid, because you are no longer scattering your focus across every possible outcome or fear, but selecting and returning to a specific state more deliberately. And this selective attention becomes one of the most important tools in shaping your experience. As this continues, even your internal dialogue begins to simplify, because instead of long chains of conflicting thoughts, there is more often a single direction being maintained, and when distraction appears, it is noticed more quickly and released more easily, without prolonged engagement. This simplification creates mental space, and in that space, new ideas, responses, and perceptions begin to emerge more freely, not forced, but allowed. As the mind is no longer overcrowded with repetitive resistance or constant correction of itself, you may also notice that your reactions to external praise or criticism begin to stabilize, because neither one defines your state as strongly as it once did. And while feedback may still be acknowledged, it no longer becomes the foundation of your inner condition. Instead, your internal state becomes self-sustaining, not dependent on reinforcement from outside. And this self-sustainability is what allows consistency to develop even in fluctuating circumstances, because your reference point is no longer external validation but internal selection. As this continues to unfold, your sense of identity becomes increasingly shaped by what you consistently assume rather than what you occasionally experience. And this shift is subtle but profound, because identity determines what feels natural, and what feels natural tends to repeat itself effortlessly over time. And so the process continues, not as a sudden transformation, but as a gradual settling into a different way of being, where imagination is no longer separate from lived experience, where inner acceptance quietly organizes outer expression, and where the line between what is chosen and what is experienced continues to blur in ways that feel increasingly natural, stable, and self-reinforcing. In closing, everything that has been shared ultimately returns to one simple but profound recognition. Your inner world is not a private background feature of life, but the creative ground from which your experience unfolds. What you consistently assume, what you repeatedly accept, and what you quietly inhabit in imagination does not remain contained within you. It expresses itself in the way your life organizes, responds, and unfolds over time. This understanding is not meant to be overwhelming or complicated. In fact, its strength lies in its simplicity. You are not required to control every detail of life, nor to force outcomes into existence through strain or constant effort. Instead, you are invited to become more aware of the state you are occupying internally, because that state is always active, always shaping perception, and always influencing direction, whether consciously chosen or unconsciously repeated. When you begin to take responsibility for that inner state, something fundamental shifts. You move away from reacting to circumstances as though they are final and unchangeable, and instead begin to recognize that circumstances are reflections, temporary expressions of deeper assumptions that can be changed. This does not deny reality, it engages with it at its source. The real turning point comes when imagination is no longer treated as escape or fantasy, but as intentional creation. And to inhabit a state within yourself as though it is already real. You are no longer negotiating with possibility, you are defining direction. And over time, what you consistently define within begins to take form without. There will always be moments of doubt, distraction, and contradiction. That is not failure, it is part of the human condition. But even in those moments, the power remains unchanged. You are never without choice regarding the state you return to. Each return strengthens a pattern. Each assumption reinforced becomes a foundation. Each inner decision becomes part of the architecture of your experience. What matters most is not perfection, but persistence in awareness. Not intensity, but continuity of state. Not force, but alignment. The transformation does not happen in a single moment of realization, but through repeated inner agreement with the version of life you are choosing to live from. And so, the message is not about waiting for life to change, but about recognizing that change begins in the unseen. It begins in thought, in assumption, in imagination, in the quiet acceptance of what you decide to inhabit as true. And there, everything else follows in its own time, in its own way, through paths you may not anticipate, but through patterns that consistently reflect the state you have chosen to maintain. If there is anything to carry forward, let it be this. You are always participating in creation, whether consciously or unconsciously. The question is not whether this process is happening, but whether you are directing it with awareness. And once that awareness is awakened, life is no longer something that simply happens to you, it becomes something that moves through you, shaped from within, expressed without, and continuously unfolding from the quiet power of imagination held correctly and lived consistently.